happy Monday. I'm here to talk about my favorite video that I'm going to be doing this year, and that is my 2019 reading stats and my 2020 reading goals. I love statistics. If you also love statistics, Kayla from Books and Lala did an amazing stats video this year. She does it every year, but she just recently posted her one from this year, so I'll leave that down below. This year I kept track of my reading in a spreadsheet, which was my first year doing that. I used the spreadsheet that Ally from Hardback Hoarder posted a video on last year. I'll link that in the cards and down below as well. I really adjusted it though, so I basically took the spreadsheet that she had created and then customized it to myself, to what I was wanting to track, things like that. So I really enjoyed using that this year, and I loved the different little graphs that I had created with it. I'm also going to be doing like a little check-in about how I did in 2019 with the videos that I made about my 2019, like the books that I wanted to read this year, the books I wanted to reread, the series that I wanted to continue with, all those different types of things I'm going to be including in this video as well. So it'll probably be pretty long, but I'm very excited to dive into this with you. So first I'm going to talk about the different books that I had included in my must-read 2019 video, and if I did read these books or if I did not read these books. So I included 10 books on this list, the first one being Rebel Dawn by A.C. Crispin, which I did read this year, and I gave this one 3 stars. It was not my favorite of this trilogy. It was a fine conclusion. Next was Dreams of Gods and Monsters, which was the final book in the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series, which I also read, and I gave 4 stars. I really liked a lot of what this book did, but I almost feel like it needed to be a 5-book series, and they tried to fit too much into this last one, so it did not 100% live up to my expectations, but it was still really good, a 4-star read. Then I had A Gathering of Shadows, which was the second book in the Dark Shade of Magic series, which I loved and gave this one 5 stars. It was definitely preferable to the first one for me. Next was The Archived, which I did start, but I decided to DNF it because it was kind of a paranormal book, which was not what I was expecting. I thought it was going to be fantasy. I'm just not interested in anything that's paranormal like this, so I DNF'd this one. Then Kiss of Deception, which I did not read. And this has been on my shelves forever. I have talked about this in so many videos that I'm going to read it. I still have not. I had Storm Dancer by Jay Kristoff, which I did give 4 stars, so I did read this one. I really liked this one. The storyline and the plot of this one was actually my favorite of the solo Jay Kristoff books that I read, so I preferred this one to even Nevernight and to Lifelike. Then I had These Broken Stars by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner, which I also read, and I also gave this one 5 stars. Such a fun science fiction series, so if you're looking for something really entertaining, definitely would recommend this one. Then I had The Naming by Alison Croggan, and I did not read this one, and I basically decided to DNF it. I was 100 pages into it before, and I started it again, but just decided to DNF it. It wasn't something I really wanted to continue with anymore. I had The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which you guys know I read this year, and I gave it 5 stars. Really enjoyed it. It's such a well-crafted book. Then finally I had The Priory of the Orange Tree, which you guys also know I did read this year and loved. I gave this one 5 stars. It ended up in my favorites of the year. Really enjoyed this one. Then for the books that I wanted to reread this year, I had Delirium by Lauren Oliver, which I reread and enjoyed the exact same amount that I did the first time that I read it, which was a 4-star enjoyment level, 4-star read. Same goes to The Maze Runner, which I also reread this year, and I had the same feelings about it as I did last time, which was a 4-star enjoyment as well. I reread Throne of Glass this year, and I so enjoyed reading that series all over again, but I only had the first one on my must reread list of the year, and I obviously did that, and I rated this one 4 stars. Then I reread A Court of Thorns and Roses, which I loved way more the second time than I did even the first time that I read it, so I was really happy about that, and I ended up giving this one a 5 star when the first time I read it, it was a 4 star. Then for my 2 failures, Winter Song by S.J. Jones. I've already talked about this one that I didn't get to read. So I didn't read Winter Song this year, but the one I completely forgot about until I was preparing for this video. I totally forgot I said that I was wanting to reread the Scott Pilgrim series. I did not do that because I 100% put it out of my mind. I did not even remember that I was planning on rereading that series this year. So I would like to reread it in 2020. Then I reread Looking for Alaska by John Green, which I still enjoyed the same amount that I did when I was a teenager, and I gave this one 5 stars. I reread 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher, and I really did not like this book, and I gave it a 2-star this time around, but I think I might even want to lower it to a 1 star because Now as an adult looking back on this book, I can see how it was very problematic, but at the time I really liked it when I was a teenager. I thought it was so impactful, but now I just see that it is not a healthy book for teenagers to be reading. I would not want any teenagers to read this book, so I do not like this one as much as I did the first time, obviously. Then I reread Girl in Pieces by Kathleen Glasgow, which I just have talked about quite a bit recently, and I reread it and I gave it 5 stars again the second time, still just as good. Then finally I reread A Taxonomy of Love by Rachel Allen, which also amazing, 5 stars, same as the first time that I read it. Then my final check-in thing that I wanted to do was for the series that I wanted to catch up on during 2019. These are just series I wanted to continue with. I think I picked 10, and I think I succeeded in all of them. The first one being the Arc of the Scythe series. I did continue on with Thunderhead, been loving this one. Just kidding, I guess, because I did not continue on with the Shattered Sea trilogy. I totally forgot that this one was on my list too, but I have it on my list for 2020, so I will be continuing on with this one. Then the Wayward Children series, I did continue on with Down Among the Sticks and Bones, and I'm really excited to finish up this one this year too. Three Dark Crowns series, which I did continue on with, but I decided to DNF this one because it was not something that I was super enjoying, but I have heard a little bit of mixed things, so I might go back to it in the future, but for now I'm taking it kind of off my TBR. The Nixia Triad, which I also DNF'd, so I started the second one and just really did not like where it was going, so I DNF'd this one. The Han Solo trilogy, I did end up finishing, like I mentioned at the beginning of this. I really liked this series. It's a really fun Star Wars tale. The Renegade series, I did catch up with Arch Enemies, but I still have Supernova to read, which I'd like to read in 2020. The Eye of the World, which I kind of succeeded, kind of did not. I got halfway through the third one and just have not finished it, but I will be finishing the third one, and hopefully I'd like to read up to book like maybe 5 or so in the next year, so we'll see how that goes, because this is one that is a hard one to read. It's a slow read, but I have been enjoying this series. The Darker Shade of Magic series, which I did complete this year, and I'm really happy about that. I loved the last 2 books way more than I loved the first one, so that was really cool. And finally, the Daughter of Smoke and Bone series. I did catch up with this one. I finished it, loved it, great series. So now on to my statistics. I'm so excited to talk about these. During 2019, I technically read 98 books according to my Goodreads, but I also read one little tiny novella that was not on Goodreads, and then I read a comic too, so according to my spreadsheet it's 100, but really it's 98. But all these statistics are for the 100 that I have listed on here. So to start off, I have books by type, so that is if it's a standalone book or a book in a series, and I obviously read much more series than I did standalones. I read 64% of series and 36% standalones. That's pretty much expected because I knew that I would be reading a ton of series this year. I typically always do. As far as the books per month that I read this year, month I read the most books was March, but that was a ton of manga. I read a bunch of manga in March. The 2 months that I read the least in were October and January, which is really funny because January 2018 I read like 25 books. So to see that in 2018 and then January 2019 I only read 5. So that was interesting. I think the average amount of books that I read per month was like probably 7 or 8. As far as my ratings go this year, I was really good about being selective about what books I was reading, and I really was only picking up books that I was like pretty sure that I was gonna love. I DNF'd the majority of the books that I thought I wasn't gonna love, so those ratings did not really play into this very much, but I rated 5 books 2 stars, 2 books 2.5 stars, 13 books 3 stars, 3 books 3.5, 35 books 4 stars, 7 books 4.5, and 33 books 5 stars. My highest amount of books were the 4 stars, but it was pretty close with 5 stars. Like I said, I read a lot of really great books this year. So my average rating was 4.1, which is really good, really a high rating. I read 38,999 pages compared to last year when I read 45,225 pages. So actually only like 6,000 less, which I am surprised by because I feel like I read a lot less this year than I did last year. The shortest book that I read this year was Memento by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is a really tiny little prequel novella to Illuminae. And the longest book I read was actually the last book that I read on the very last day of the year, and that was Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J Maas, so this was a reread for me. The most popular book that I read, according to Goodreads, was The Fault in Our Stars, which has been read by 3,400,000 people, and the least popular was New Game Volume 1, which has only been read by 209 people, so that's pretty interesting. Going back to my spreadsheet, sorry, I switched over to my Goodreads thing for a little bit. Going back to my spreadsheet, according to genre, my biggest genre that I read was fantasy, which was 40%. Next was contemporary with 16%. Then I have science fiction, which was 16. Oh, so contemporary and science fiction were tied, which is interesting. I read about 3% classics, 3% thrillers, 5.8% mystery, 7% dystopian, 1.9% nonfiction, and 1.9% historical fiction, so that's interesting. I'm not really surprised by this because fantasy is my most read genre, which I always know. Science fiction is my favorite genre, but I don't find as many science fiction that I'm really as interested in reading as I do with fantasy. Then as far as the years of books that I read, so these were the years that the books were published in, this is really interesting to me too. So the majority of the books that I read were published from 2010 to 2017, which I was very surprised by. That is at 41%, and my next highest was 2019 releases, which was 25%. I really thought that my 2018-2019 releases were going to be the highest. One of those would be the highest year published, but that is interesting. I read 2 books published in 2020, 25 books published in 2019, 17 books published in 2018, 41 books published from 2010 to 2017, 11 books published from 2000 till 2009, 1 book published in the 90s, 1 book published in the 80s, 1 book published in the 60s, 1 book published in the 50s. As far as books that I read where the source that I got them was, I had mostly books from my TBR shelf, which was really nice. I am super happy about that. Next year I want to do even more from my TBR shelf, but we'll see how that goes. So I had 21 ARCs this year. I had bought 10 of them, which is really not too bad. As far as my book subscriptions, that has been my lowest amount. So I only had 1 from Shelf Love Crate, 3 from Owl Crate, and I did 0 from Fairy Loot, which is really interesting. I had 5 that I borrowed from the library, 12 that I had purchased using points on Book Outlet or points at my local used bookstore. 2 were sent to me by the publisher, which also could be the ARCs, but I had final copies sent to me by publishers, so that's usually what that is. 12 that I got from a book trade, and 34 from my TBR shelf. Now as far as format, this is also pretty interesting. I had the majority of physical books, so I had almost 70% as physical books, which I knew would happen because that is always my main thing. Actually 90% were physical books if you count the ARCs, because I had 20 ARCs, which were all physical ARCs, 69 physical books, 0 audiobooks, and 11 ebooks. So as you could tell, I'm not really an audiobook listener. I just cannot pay attention to the audiobooks. I always zone out while I'm listening, so they're just not really productive to me, so I don't typically read those. Then as far as the age range, this one I also thought was interesting because I was actually really prepared for the majority of my books to be YA, which I didn't really want. I wanted it to be pretty 50-50 or even leaning towards the adult side. But this year I read 55% YA, 35% adult, and 10% new adult. So only 55% were YA books. And I didn't read any middle grade this year, which was also interesting because usually I read a couple. Then as far as debuts versus not debuts, 79% of the books that I read this year were not a debut and 21% were a debut. So that was 21 books debuts, 79 were not. I also reread 19 books, so out of the 100 books that I read, 81 were not a reread and 19 were. That is actually the most number of rereads that I've read in a year in a long time, since probably I was a teenager. Now into my author statistics. I read 68% female and 31% male, which I was very surprised by because honestly I thought it was going to be more female authors than that. It seemed like as I was keeping track, everyone was female, so I'm really surprised that 31% was actually male authors. Then now on to author nationality. This is not race, this is not where the books are taking place, this is only where the author is from. So I had 69.8% were American, which is also not surprising because the majority of publishing happens in the United States, sadly, so a lot of American authors are who's getting published. My next highest was Asian authors, which was 11.5%. Then I had 9.4% were European, so that could be anywhere in Europe, obviously. It's just too much to do all the individual countries, so I just kind of did regions of some of them, but I wanted to know how many Canadian and Mexican authors, so those are separated too. So I had 5.2% Canadian authors, 2.1% Caribbean authors, 1% Mexican authors. I also read one book by an African author, so that would also be 1%, and that's the little like yellow sliver here, but I don't know why the label is not popping up for that one, and I don't want to deal with it. I also read 4 Australian authors, which is also not coming up on the pie chart, and I don't know why it's not coming up, but I read 4 Australian authors. So overall, I read 4 Australian authors, 67 American authors, 5 Canadian authors, 11 Asian authors, 1 African author, 1 Mexican author, 2 Caribbean authors, and 9 European authors. So the 2 that I did not read from were South American and Middle Eastern, which I'd really like to read more from in the next year. So if you have any recommendations for South American authors or Middle Eastern authors, please let me know. I also divided all my stats into monthly stats so I can see like how many 5-star books I read each month, you know, different things like that. But I'm not going to go into all those because it would be a lot discussing all that too. I also ended the year with 145 books on my physical TBR, so those are how many books I have on my shelves that I have not read. That is one of my goals for 2020, is I'd like to get down my physical TBR to about 70 books or 65, 70 books. I would like to, at the end of 2020, have that. Whether that's from unhauling books or reading them, I don't really care. I just don't want to have this many unread books because it just gets to be a lot. One of my other goals for 2020 is to finish more series. I have so many series that I'm in the middle of that I have not read. Like in 2019, I started 26 series and I only finished like 8 of them. So that is a lot of series that I have started that I need to catch up on. I think I have about 32 series that I'm actively in the middle of reading. Now that 26 that I read this year, that does not count any books that I decided I don't want to continue with the series. That's just how many I started. So some of those I decided I don't want to continue with. I do keep track of how many series I'm in the middle of, and it is 32 like I had mentioned. So I'd like to get that down. In February, I'm actually going to be using the whole month to finish series, or to catch up on series. So I'm going to be reading a lot of series finales in that month. And then other reading goals that I would like is I have my Goodreads goal set at 100 this year. In 2019, I set it to 85 and I got to 98 or 100 depending on how you look at it with my stats. I think 100 is a reasonable amount for me to read. It's like not devoting my entire time to reading, but is just very like attainable for me. So I'm gonna keep that next year at 100. I'd also like to read more of my comics and graphic novels during this next year. In 2019, I kind of slacked off on them. 2018 was like a big year for me for graphic novels, and I'd really like to get back into that because I have acquired a lot that I have not finished. And I'd also like to do some more like comics wrap-ups and comics TBRs on my channel too. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff too, please let me know down below because I'd love to know if you're also interested in comics. Then I have 2 channel goals for 2020. The first one is I'd really like to get to 1,000 subscribers. I think I'm sitting about 820 right now. I'd like to have like a starting point and to get to 1,000 subscribers during 2020, which I think is attainable for me. My second channel goal is that I'd like to make my channel more cohesive and have more of like a brand, if you will. Because this last year I've really just been trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my channel, how I wanted everything to look, what I wanted my thumbnails to be, and I'm getting kind of into a groove of what I like and just figuring out what I like as far as YouTube goes. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed talking with me about my statistics. I know I really had fun looking over them, and if you made a statistics video this year, please let me know down below because I love watching them. I think they're so interesting. But thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!